Welcome, everyone. This is Csun Act Now's Town Hall. If you embrace diversity but ignore disability, you're doing it wrong. My name is Julia Heinen, and I'm the Interim Director of Community Engagement and a professor in the music department. Today's event is sponsored by the Csun Act Now campus team. CAN is a collaboration of students, faculty, and staff working to craft interactive activities, performances, lectures, seminars, and exhibits to help matadors make informed decisions and participate meaningfully in their communities. The Csun Act Now events help matadors establish and maintain communities of support on issues important to them, provide information and direction on getting involved in contemporary issues, and help create connections between civic engagement and classroom learning and everyday practice. Together, we can help the Csun community make meaningful change on critical issues this year and in the future. This is our final Csun Act Now event for fall 2021, and I want to encourage you to check out our website for the upcoming events. They'll be terrific, and I know you'll enjoy each and every one of them. I'll put the link in the chat, and we'll have those events listed shortly. Please feel free to put your questions into the question and answer queue at any point during the webinar, and also you're welcome to chat with other attendees and the panelists during the event using the chat feature. I'd now like to introduce a member of our Csun Act Now campus team who will introduce our speaker. Professor Ellen Stoll is a faculty member from our Education, Psychology, and Counseling department. She has embraced her passion for teaching all ages, first as a K-8 teacher for 14 years, and now in higher education. She is an amazing member of the Csun community and an empathetic and caring teacher. Ellen, we're so happy to have you here.
I'm unmuting. Thank you so much for having me. I am so excited to be here. I have been on the Csun campus as a student. I got my credential here, and as a faculty member, and I use a wheelchair and I experience disability due to my mobility impairment. And I am so excited to have our guests, Rebecca Coakley from the Ford Foundation, who I use a film with her in it for my disability studies students, and I'm incredibly excited to have her here. She has been an advisor for 12 different presidents on disability and including social justice issues about disability. I just love her and I'm a big fan of hers. So Rebecca, thank you so much for being here. I am so excited to have you here.
Thank you so much, Ellen. Hi, my name is Rebecca Coakley. My pronouns are she, hers. I come to you from Lenape territory here in the great state of New Jersey. I'm having to get used to saying that because I'm originally from Washington. Well, most recently, I've been in Washington, D.C. for quite a long time. I have achondroplasia, which is the most common form of dwarfism. I am a white woman with sort of chin length or almost chin length red hair, an abundance of freckles. I'm wearing tortoise shell glasses, a black blazer and a white t-shirt, and my backdrop is the very inaccessible garden at the Ford Foundation where I work. And it's my snarky Sagittarius tendencies that I make a point of focusing on the fact that we have this absolutely beautiful garden at this gorgeous building in New York City that is still largely inaccessible to a number of folks in the disability community. And I do that for very much the same topic that I'm here to speak to you today, about the issues tied to embracing diversity, but ignoring disability. You cannot alleviate poverty in this country without thinking about and including disability. You cannot end police violence or state violence of any kind without disability. You cannot end food insecurity without disability. You cannot ensure reproductive justice without disability. And frankly, there is no justice without disability. Somewhere along the way over the last 20 years, what I like to say is euphemism bingo. The The terms diversity, equity, and inclusion got blended together in what I like to think of as like a peanut butter and jelly sandwich that essentially got thrown into a blender. These terms are not the same thing, and I think it really does us a disservice when we behave as though they are. The term inclusion specifically comes out of the special education space, and it cannot be separated from disability. Inclusion means understanding the relationship between the way people function and how they participate in society, and ensuring that everybody has the same opportunities to participate in every aspect of life, including their work, their schooling, their social life, to the best of their abilities and their desires. Accessibility is actually how you get to inclusion. And when we talk about accessibility, and this is an important piece of the inclusion conversation, it's not, but we gave you a ramp, which is what I always sort of feel like it's marked up as. Well, you people want to be there. You should be grateful that we gave you a ramp. You should be grateful that there are power buttons on the door. You should be grateful if you're a person that uses the purse hook in a restroom, that you can actually reach the purse hook instead of having to put your purse on the floor, because who wants to do that in a public restroom? Disability access advances disability inclusion. In a narrow sense, it is the technical requirements. So it is the ramps, the doors, the lighting, the meeting room, but it's also the access to information, meaning websites, video captioning, other forms of technological accessibility. Accessibility is most powerful when it's tied to inclusive practices and policies that welcome and celebrate the participation of disabled people and moves from a space of mere compliance with laws. So it's about, moving from training security staff on how to welcome and interact with disabled visitors to making sure they know how to engage with people with disabilities everywhere. It means not just having pictures of people with disabilities using outdated technology and wearing 70s fashion on your website, but actually showing people with disabilities engaging in the built environment in positions of authority, learning, thriving in the space. And frankly, in the next phase of COVID, it will be unacceptable if accessibility is not more streamlined or more mainstreamed. Often now we're hearing even the conversation become one of justice, equity, diversity, and inclusion. And Difina Lazarus Stewart has a statement where she says, diversity asks, who's in the room? Equity responds, who is trying to get into the room but can't? Whose presence in the room is under constant threat of erasure? Then inclusion joins the party and asks, has everyone's ideas been heard? Is the information in a format that everyone can access? Justice responds with whose ideas won't be taken as seriously because they aren't in the majority. Then we see diversity join the conversation and ask, how many more of X do we have this year versus last? Equity responds, what conditions have we created in the space that maintain certain groups as the perpetual majority here? Inclusion asks, is this environment safe for everyone to feel like they belong? And it ends with justice challenging the whole conversation and saying, whose safety is being sacrificed and minimized in order to allow others to be comfortable maintaining dehumanizing views? And I think it really goes to show us that as we continue to have this conversation about diversity, equity, and inclusion, it has to be all the pieces, including justice. You don't get to justice without all three pieces, but at the same time, you cannot be using these terms interchangeably as we find people often doing so. It is now my pleasure to introduce the amazing, the phenomenal Syreeta Nolan. I will admit today is the first time that Syreeta and I have met each other, and it makes my day because I have been a huge, massive, unabashed Twitter fangirl of hers for a number of years now. Syreeta is a disability justice advocate. She serves as co-founder of Disabled in Higher Education on Twitter, and the handle for that is @disinhighered, and is the founder of JADE, Justice, Advocacy and Disability Education, as a holistic disabled justice platform focused on empowering disabled students, faculty, staff, and alumni through community and support. Her lived experience as a Black, disabled, bisexual woman has informed her advocacy goals along with her career goals. As a board member of Health Advocate X, she hopes to expand the reach of health advocacy in partnership with her organization while bringing disability advocacy and health advocacy together. I want to pause for a moment and say, think about what that looks like in 2021. I think the conversation on disability advocacy and health advocacy has been intentionally separated for so long. And if there's anything that we come out of the pandemic with, it really is a sense that that cannot be our future moving forward. She graduated with her bachelor's in human health psychology from the University of California, San Diego, and hopes to continue to obtain a PhD in health policy or prevention science toward her goal to transform the mental health field through comprehensive preventative systems similar to what we have in our physical health system. And with that, I'm going to turn this over to my friend and sister in movement work, Syreeta. Take us away.
Oh, thank you so much, Rebecca. I was so starstruck when I first heard that you were going to be introducing me. It's like, who am I but an undergrad who's been working very, very hard to get to this point where I feel included, and it shouldn't have to be this hard of a lift. But being disabled in higher ed, it is a hard lift. It's a very heavy lift. I could talk about this for hours, but to prevent that from happening, I have a PowerPoint. So I wanted to invite each of us, as we have this invoking of act now, to act now for disability justice, not just in higher education, but beyond that. So what does this look like? So thank you so much for having me here today. And our learning objectives are understanding the impact of how EDI, this equity and diversity and inclusion, is perceived in higher education, intersectionality, resilience, accessibility, and ableism more deeply, because these are things that disabled students live at these intersections, and we're only seen as disabled in the classroom quite frequently. And tips on how to be more disability inclusive within and beyond the clinics, the classrooms, wherever our lived environments are, as disabled students, staff, faculty, alumni. And if anyone else is on Twitter with Rebecca and I, feel free to live tweet with us today. So you can always use a mention of Syreeta Nolan or Nolan_Syreeta, and at CSCOSN, and at Dis in Higher Ed in your tweet. And remember alt text for any images, screenshots, or GIFs. And for accessibility of PowerPoints, there's always use subtitles functions, times without live captioning or AI captioning, and accessibility check functions to make sure that your PowerPoint is accessible as possible. So let's set up a safe space. Feel free to converse within our chat, share your thoughts and your experiences without any judgment. Be respectful of each other, and also be open to new ideas. And first, let me share a bit of where I am today, because I finished my thesis with all of my extensions and everything. This should have been submitted in May, but at UCSD, I've had a supportive environment in the allies I've worked with to have this delayed submission date instead of May, submitting it as an incomplete in December. So I'm just so honored to be here. It's a micro celebration to share with you. So thank you for being here with me. So let's set the stage. We have communities within higher education. If we think of any community centers that might be on your campus, you might be thinking of Black communities, Latinx communities, communities for women, Indigenous communities, LGBTQIA, like identifying as all but one of these, like here at UCSD, we had the Black Resource Center, the Women's Resource Center, the Intertribal Resource Center. We had this LGBTQIA Resource Center. And we had support for gender nonconforming students, for their hormones and everything that was needing for transitions covered in student health. It's beautiful, but what's horrible, what's ugly is that disability is left out of EDI efforts when this community is actually one of the largest minority groups, and it compounds the experiences that you have in any of these 6 groups. And there could be groups I didn't mention here as well, and you can feel free to leave those in the chat. But we also have some of the highest factors of having impacts from disability, whether it's a mental or physical disability. And each culture carries a different conception of why we don't talk about disability. And it's hard to live at these intersections. And it becomes harder because of the models of disability that higher education exemplifies. So higher education, medical model might be familiar as accommodations, mountain of forms you need to fill out. Let's make sure we get everything crossed off, T's dotted, so you can get like interpreters like phenomenal Kevin here. So this model is like defined as disability as diagnosed by a doctor, your disability benefits, the accommodations in your classrooms, person first language, like a person with disabilities, and disability as a weakness, as a liability. Because sometimes at UCSD, I felt like I wasn't really respected, or like they weren't proud of me for who I was as a disabled student. Being a McNair scholar, I think I was part of that program more because I was a Black woman, I was a woman, but nothing selected me because of who I am in my disability identities. And this speaks to the social model and the culture that the disability community has. So these can look at disability as a strength and not as a bad word. Self-diagnosis is valid, which comes in conflict with the medical model because self-diagnosis is valid, but in a higher education space, it can feel invalidating because you don't have the same ability to go to your office supporting disabled students and say, hey, I need accommodations. Well, where's your doctor's note? I don't have one. I'm self-diagnosed. And I've always felt like there was something different. And I was just diagnosed with ADHD last year. So we come to think of what does it look like living self-diagnosed and unable to achieve a full medical diagnosis. And I identify as disabled as proudly as I do as anything else. Disability as identity can sound like a disabled person, invisibly disabled, wheelchair user, whatever pronouns we're comfortable with, they're just as important as gender pronouns and disability as a diverse community. So, and that's the identity first language of disabled person. So it's just, how do we really consider disabilities, even within disability communities? As I mentioned, self-diagnosis versus diagnosis, you have this balance of privilege versus barriers, where there's like these scales that are symbolized in law. And as individuals, we may have different privileges in our life, like the advantages that we have. We may have different barriers, like disadvantages that we have. And you can reflect on this yourself as well. But for me, some of the privileges that I have are my diagnoses, financial aid that I had throughout my education career, and health insurance to actually be able to pay $650 for an ADHD diagnosis. So yeah. And then some of the barriers that I had is this late diagnosis of ADHD, because I can look back and wonder what it would have been like to be diagnosed as a child. I'm a Black woman, and Black women are seen as strong, and disability is in the society is seen as weakness because not a lot of spaces allow us to inquire about what disability really is. And I'm also low income, so I'm always financially struggling in one way or another, and crowdfunding on Twitter. So that's part of life. And we talk about this edgy perspective that Rebecca discussed at length. And I love to think of it as an apple tree. So we have inequality, unequal access to opportunities. This apple's just falling onto the child's hands because, hey, it's leaning more toward the left. This works out. And then we have the child on the right with a question mark above her head. It's like, well, what about me? And that's like a disabled student saying, well, what about me? Equality, this looks great. We've got evenly distributed tools and assistance, same ladders, so everyone can like reach the same point toward the tree. But this kid on the right, is, maybe we'll call him a disabled child, has an exclamation point above his head. It's like, no, this still isn't good enough. And then we have equity, custom tools that identify and address inequality. But you see that you still have this imbalance of the tree is still leaning left. So you still have that person that had more privilege having easier access to the apples, where at some point, the child on the right is not going to have any more apples to pick. And when we look at justice, we've fixed this system to offer equal access to both tools and opportunities. And I think that's all that disabled students really want, is an equal access to tools and opportunities like mentoring, undergraduate research program, resources to be seen as a community. But we don't get that, do we, in higher education? And sometimes it's the most heartbreaking thing to work and work and work to really feel like you have the support you need. And it doesn't stop at just getting the accommodations, but with every instructor that you have. So I bring up my identities as being Black and a Black woman and disabled, but what is intersectionality? This is something that is really critical to understand, because who I am as a disabled woman does not stand apart from who I am as a Black woman, as an Indigenous woman. So let's take a moment together to listen to the words of Kimberly Crenshaw in discussing what intersectionality is.
Intersectionality is just a metaphor for understanding the ways that multiple forms of inequality or disadvantage sometimes compound themselves, and they create obstacles that often are not understood within conventional ways of thinking about anti-racism or feminism or whatever social justice advocacy structures we have. Intersectionality isn't so much a grand theory, it's a prism for understanding certain kinds of problems. African American girls are 6 times more likely to be suspended than white girls. That's probably a race and a gender problem. It's not just a race problem, it's not just a gender problem. So I encourage people to think about how the convergence of race stereotypes or gender stereotypes might actually play out in the classroom, between teachers and students, between students and other students, between students and administrators, and commit themselves to understanding that as a way of intervening and providing equal educational opportunity for all students, regardless of their identities. Identity isn't simply a self-contained unit, it is a...
Oh, sorry, I realized that I forgot to turn the captions on the video. My brain. Let me turn that on for the remainder of this. There you go. Sorry about that.
Relationship between people in history, people in communities, people in institutions. So schools do a good job when they understand that, and when they commit themselves to curricular development, to opportunities in the school for all students to understand the histories that have brought us to this particular moment. You can't change outcomes without understanding how they've come about. So independent schools can take the lead on that, to be responsive to their student populations and to the communities out of which the students come.
Thank you all for taking that moment with me to learn more about intersectionality from Kimberly Crenshaw. She is someone that I've so admired in how she frames intersectionality, how it intersects every part of who we are. And I don't just see it as like two roads that come together in a fork, but really this beautiful flowered pattern that shows sex, gender, geography, disability, culture, income, education, really begins to build the depth of how disability is different from a Christian family. Like having mental illness, my mom expected me to be able to pray more, pray harder, to be able to be emotionally fixed, but that's just not how emotional imbalance works. And when we think about intersectionality within disability, intersectionality is about fighting discrimination within discrimination. We could reframe this as intersectionality is about fighting racism within ableism, because I live at that intersection where they both affect me, but only one will most institutions talk about publicly. Intersectionality tackles inequalities within inequalities. Like, of course, being Black, I have inequalities I face. Being a woman, there are inequalities that I face. We have lower representation in many fields because of race or gender. But that inequality compounds when disability comes into the picture and questioning disclosure. And intersectionality is about protecting minorities within minorities. Like here at UCSD, I don't know if the same for you there, you're a campus. We have this center called Carrot Sark for survivors of sexual abuse, provides this whole wraparound service, but the same isn't there for medical trauma. The same information is not there for awake, conscious, painful procedures, being okay to say no when you need to say no, even if it means you won't have the results you need. And I didn't feel protected in that because there's no center that really knows about medical trauma and has the support for disabled students who go through that. So I am a proud disabled Black, bisexual, Indigenous woman. And the Black feminist disability framework helped me to understand what it means to live at this intersectional identity. Because we have this myth in being Black that we're strong, we can endure pain better than anyone, surmount otherwise difficult obstacles because of our innate tenacity. But this disallows us disability. The survival becomes depoliticized because it's just something we do. But survival becomes a form of resistance and a source of celebration, especially in the reality that, as Lucille Clinton said, that every day something has tried to kill me and has failed. But think of how exhausting a life is when every day something tries to kill you and has failed. Every day I felt like higher education didn't want me there, that they tolerated me, a ramp, a button, but they didn't welcome me. They didn't welcome including me. So we think about resilience, this little leaf breaking through this crack. But what is resilience? It's something psychology can frame as this amazing quality to be knocked down, get back up, letting difficulties and traumatic, not letting these difficulties and failure overcome them and drain them. It sounds a lot like this construct of inspiration porn as well within like the disability communities, where we place disabled people on pedestals and go like, oh, look at what they can do with their disability, and then pit against like, oh, hey, why can't you do that? They're doing that. And it becomes something that is so emotionally draining. So resilience can be something that just becomes draining because people do tell me I am strong, but I am also so tired. That's why my thesis that was due in May took all the way till December to complete. And really, resilience becomes this exhaustion from battling systemic barriers that no one actually faces themselves. Like resilience puts it on me to be strong enough to overcome and stuff. But systemic barriers that exist within institutions, within higher education, within policies over education that have this strong special education or education system from K through 12, it just erodes into nothingness in higher education. And I deal with ableism alone a lot because it's never named. I'm so resilient because I have to be. there's just a toxic level of resilience that endangers my academic mental health at many times through my undergrad. And like through COVID, grief support has been widely available for losing family members, the ones closest to us, but the same is not available in grieving our non-disabled self when we come disabled later in life. And I wish there was more support. Resilience can look like looking at self-discipline more and not questioning policies. It can look like focusing on the resources available to disabled people and the ability to access those resources. I see that as the traditional model that we have as most higher education systems about building resilience in the life of disabled people. We can't look at it just like this, they need to do it, their family needs to do it, because that's putting the weight of all of society's problems on their shoulders. But this needs a wider process of challenging social, attitudinal, and structural barriers that increase adversity in the lives of disabled people. And this is in solely being disabled, but when it comes to intersect with other parts of who we are, it becomes even worse. And it can just become so exhausting that you just don't want to go into detail about the support that you need. You may not bring it up, not make an issue of it, and don't say anything at all. This is an illustration of access fatigue, which is this everyday pattern of constantly needing to ask someone for help, participate in access, a demand to taxing and relentless that at times it makes access simply not worth the effort. There's plenty of events where I've not requested a live captioner when that's one of the supports that really helps me. And I do that because you don't want to be bothered, and I'm already tired and overwhelmed with things. So I don't do that sometimes. So yeah, we all get tired and it's absolutely okay. So one more video to unpack ableism. I really love the way they frame it, because the way we don't talk about ableism in the same way we do racism. We've never been taught what it is and the nature of what it is. So I'm going to turn on my closed captioning early here. Let's see, here we go, and play this video.
So what is ableism? Ableism is part of a larger group of isms that includes racism, sexism, ageism, and so on. Ism beliefs often devalue certain groups or individuals based on characteristics they can't control. Ableism is a learned belief that people with typical abilities are superior to those with physical or cognitive disabilities. When we see ableism around us, it appears as a prejudice toward people with disabilities. It can be demonstrated consciously or unconsciously through words and actions. Language is one of the most powerful ways we connect with each other. Unfortunately, ableism shows up in our language all the time. You've probably heard of social media campaigns that ask people to stop using the R word. The R word, or retarded, was once a legitimate medical term to describe people with cognitive disabilities. But over time, people began using this word to describe all kinds of bad things. The result was that the R word became associated with being bad or wrong. Using the R word today is not only ableist, it's considered hate speech. Euphemisms are another way that ableism shows up in our language. A euphemism is a word or expression that is substituted for something else that is considered too harsh, blunt, or embarrassing. Imagine how you might feel if something about you was so bad or embarrassing that others felt ashamed to even talk about it. Common disability euphemisms include differently abled, handicapable, mentally challenged, and special needs, just to name a few. Disability scholars and self-advocates label these terms as patronizing because they reinforce the belief that disability is an undesirable state. Instead of euphemisms, many self-advocates have voiced a preference for simply using the term disability or disabled. This term can be used with person-first language, for example, my sister is a person with a disability, or it can be used in identity-first language, as in, my sister is a disabled athlete. Keep in mind that person-first language and identity-first language are personal preferences. If you're not sure which one a person prefers, it's okay to ask. Another way that ableism creeps into our language comes from how we describe the everyday lives of people with disabilities. For example, you may have heard someone say, "My loved one is wheelchair-bound." A statement like this makes the wheelchair user sound more like a machine than a human being. In fact, language like wheelchair-bound and nonverbal dehumanizes people with disabilities, making them seem less than their typical friends and family. Instead of talking about people with disabilities from a deficit perspective, try using a strengths perspective. For example, you could say, "Lauren is a disabled athlete who uses a wheelchair." Or, "Frank is a poet who uses a speech device to communicate." Ableism can show up in our language when we least expect it. Many common phrases draw on negative perceptions of disabilities, even if we're not talking about a disabled person. When you're speaking to others, watch out for ableist phrases like, "That's lame." This phrase associates mobility disabilities with a negative connotation. Likewise, phrases like, "She was blind to his true nature," associate vision impairments with not being as smart or perceptive of others. Finally, watch out for phrases like, "His request fell on deaf ears." This phrase implies that deafness is linked to a lack of empathy. One thing we know for sure is that no matter who we are, we all make mistakes. If you use ableist language by mistake, here are 2 simple steps you can take. First, apologize and own your mistake. You could say something like, "I'm sorry, that was really offensive. I need to be better about thinking before I speak." Step 2, move on. Rehashing the mistake or trying to cast blame just makes the whole thing more awkward and painful for everyone. In conclusion, ableism is based on a learned belief that typical people are naturally superior. Ableism can show up in our actions and in our words. Ableist language can be openly hateful, result from euphemisms intended to mask our discomfort, or be completely accidental. Keep in mind that being an ally means calling out ableist speech when we hear it. It also means listening to people with disabilities to learn what language they prefer when describing themselves.
Thank you so much for joining me in that video. And you can also watch more of their videos on Social Work Technical Writer on YouTube. This one is something that I always turn to because I realized that even as a disability advocate, I used to use some of these ableist terms like being deaf to something or blind to something before I actually realized the true scope of ableism. And it's okay. We're all growing and evolving in that. So how can we really support disability justice where you are at San Diego State Northridge? This looks like, in my perspective, humbly, as supporting disability pronouns in similar ways to gender pronouns, because it's an identity that matters to each of us in a different way. And for myself, I would be very uncomfortable if someone called me a woman with disabilities. My disability pronouns of disabled woman, neurodivergent, and invisibly disabled are something that's really important to me. And supporting neurodivergent students and self-diagnosed having sessions within lab sessions. Oh, okay, cool. Sorry about my internet. It may be going in and out. I hope you can still hear me. But yeah, so supporting neurodivergent students who are formally and self-diagnosed may look like having library sessions of co-working. It may look like being able to bring students together outside of that programs of Students for Disabilities and Accessibility. It looks like supporting disability studies programs, deaf studies programs, disability mentoring programs in sciences, because disabled in STEM, it's a very, very difficult world to be disabled in an environment that's always pushing you to work harder, longer, and faster. And discussing ableism in a way that's similar to racism, calling it out is something that's important because we don't change what we don't name. We must claim this problem to really begin to make up for the mistakes that we've made in structural ableism that creates the toxic environments in higher education where we have to push ourselves. And having safe spaces for disabled students in the same way as Black students, in the same way as Indigenous students, in the same way as LGBTQ students, in the same way, disabled students deserve a space for them where they can come together. Disabled students, staff, faculty, maybe alumni could come in and visit. And having that be a fully accessible, sensory sensitive space where they can feel safe after dealing with an ableist teacher over here, dealing with delays in having meetings because of an interpreter. Reading that story, Carla, in the chat was heartbreaking. How else are our disabled students, disabled staff not feeling supported? And this can look at looking ahead and how we support disabled student success. Because I know that here at UCSD, we don't track disability diversity statistics in the same way. We don't track disability student success rates in the same way that we do for any other ethnic group. We care more about their success, but does our success matter as disabled students? And I argue that it really does. So many fields beyond STEM, well, like in medicine and psychology, so many different ways where ableism can become barriers for us. How do we talk about that in our applications? Do we have someone to guide us and mentor us in how to write those applications and make that choice wisely of disclosing or not disclosing? Taking time to really understand the barriers that your disability community has faced, because my stories come from my experience at UC San Diego. I'm in Southern California, different institution. Every institution has a different way that ableism has created a toxic environment. And being able to open a space, even a roundtable, to discuss that is critical. And I look forward to the discussion we'll have in our Q&A. And including disability fully within inclusion efforts, not just talking about a ramp, not just talking about like having interpreters, but actually valuing disabled students similarly, having the same engagement within voting, within being in student government. How are we fully including disability outside the classroom? Because it might be a surprise to some people, but I am disabled outside the classroom too. And I feel like the way that accommodations work, they expected me to just be disabled in my dorm and disabled in my classroom. And then when I wasn't in those spaces, magically, I wasn't disabled and did not have those problems. I still have those problems, and they still create impacts over the course of my life. So we look at what are next steps and how do we look at like disability history in this scope? Because we have African-American history, Indigenous histories, but we never learned the history of disability. And Crip Camp helped me understand myself more than I ever had. If you have not watched Crip Camp, it is phenomenal, amazing, the disability justice movement that led to the ADA. And I never knew that story until I watched that movie. And how I got through K through 12, 19 years of undergrad, that's another story for a different time. But how I make it through all of that and never knew this history, it's shocking. But yet it's not either, in this way that ableism has won. If this was a battle where ableism was deteriorating our society and making disabled people feel less than, yep, score one for ableism. But we have to take back this space. We have to create space for disability justice, because as Rebecca said, there is no justice without disability justice. Black Lives Matter did so much for Black rights, and it did not do as much for Black disabled rights. A Black man is killed because he called for during a mental health crisis. his identity as a disabled person is wiped away. As we say their name, as another Black person killed, Black lives matter. Black disabled lives matter too. So some small steps is calling out ableism, because students, we exist in many different spaces, and ableism can exist in the assignments we're given. Like one teacher required that I argue both ways of, should we cure autism? I was not touching that with a 10-foot pole, and I gracefully took my loss of points for only saying that there is no need to cure autism, but to better understand and to discuss the impact of ableism in marginalized communities on campuses, because I don't think we take enough time to realize how Blackness impacts disability different than being an undocumented person who's disabled. Every intersection looks different, and I can only speak to mine. So that's why the communities need to come together and openly discuss disability and really learn where inaccessibility exists in your programs. And that includes like student activities. Like disabled students deserve to go to student activities because we're students. And supporting disabled undergraduates beyond the classroom. Labs should be accessible just as much as any classroom should be accessible. Labs need to be accessible pipetters, accessible benches, hoods, chairs, flexible scheduling, and actually having that discussion with the research community and actually having them engage deeply. So I'm honored that I get to, in February, if anyone's interested, to discuss my intersection of chronic pain, medical trauma, and Blackness, and to really create spaces for medical providers to identify intersectionality and medical trauma and empower each to create safer spaces for their patients. And I thank you all so much for joining me today, for being so interactive in the chat. I have enjoyed so much like looking in the chat during the breaks at your comments. So feel free to follow Disabled in Higher Ed and get involved in our community. And we also have a new website, so you can look at that on our Twitter, and we are a fiscally sponsored nonprofit. So you can donate so that we can hold live events one day in the future. And please feel free to follow me at Nolan_Syreeta or email me at nolan.jade@gmail.com. And also I wanted to highlight the Black deaf community. And there's this amazing pro bono ASL manifesto that talks about the struggles that they experience in their communities. Learn about communities that you aren't a part of. I learned so much from the deaf community, from wheelchair users, and I'm really proud that I get to do this work. And when they share out my slides, you can feel free to visit all of these resources, including my article on the compounded burden of being a Black and disabled student during the age of COVID-19. And thank you so much for having me.
I'd like to introduce again Professor Ellen Stoll. Ellen, if you wouldn't mind turning on your video so that I could spotlight you to introduce our next section.
We may have lost her again. It's Beth.
All right. Well, Beth, I'm going to introduce you then. So it is my distinct honor to introduce a wonderful, wonderful professor of special education at Csun, Professor Beth Lasky. And in addition to being a wonderful teacher here and has been since 1987, I think, right, Beth? Something like that? Long time. She is also an alumnus of Cal State Northridge. So Beth, welcome, and we're so happy to have you.
I'm back, and I would just like to say Beth is my menace. I'm sorry, my computer crashes constantly, but Beth is amazing, my mentor, and who is the force behind all of this. So Julia, thank you for taking over and introducing Beth, and thank you for being patient with the crashing.
Thanks, Ellen. Okay, so my task here today is, lucky me, is I'm going to moderate the panel that we've put together. And what the purpose of this is to really talk about how we can make Csun a place of belonging for our folks with disabilities, whatever kind of disability, as well as find out what needs to be done here on our campus. So what I'll be doing is I will announce a question to one of our panel members so that each person has a chance to speak. I've tried to come up with questions that are appropriate for the different folks that are on our panel, and as well as Syreeta and Rebecca. So I'm going to start. The way we put the panel together is we wanted students, faculty, staff, administrators. We really tried to reach out to a lot of folks that we either knew personally. Ellen was very helpful with this, as well as other people on campus that I've certainly worked with over the years, as well as been on committees, to ask them for recommendations of people that might want to be on the committee. So I'm going to start with our students because for me, that's what I've been here for all these years, is the students on our campus. So I'd like to start with Finley. I have not had the pleasure of having Finley in a class with me. So Julia, I think we will need to have Finley turn on, or you just said it in the chat, okay. So Finley is a student on our campus. My understanding is she's a graduate student, I believe, in our credential program in special education. So Finley, my question for you.
Sorry, I apologize, just one moment. I'm not able to turn my video on because the host stopped it earlier. So I need permission to turn my video back on.
Oh.
I would like for people, there we go. Thank you. And also a quick correction, my pronouns are they, them, please.
Thank you, I apologize.
That's okay.
So my first question is very quick, and that is, are you registered with DRES, and why or why not?
Thank you. That's something I have struggled a lot with, and I've talked to some people about this. I am not registered with DRES. So I just would like to give a quick introduction to who I am too, if that's okay, if we have a moment for that. So I'm Finley. I am autistic, self-diagnosed. I have mental health illnesses. And I was diagnosed ADHD in 2nd grade. And I have a whole host of disabilities that form and shape who I am, both as a student and as a person. I am not registered with DRES for a few reasons. One of the initial reasons is that when I was undergrad at Csun, I didn't know about DRES. I was not aware that there were disability services available. And when I finally found out that there were later on in my undergrad career, I thought I did not qualify for DRES because at the time I was not self-diagnosed autistic. I just had my mental health challenges and I didn't know if that qualified me. Looking forward to now, I'm in a credential program for single subject English. So another quick correction on my identity there. Single subject English and weirdly enough chemistry. So if you want to figure out those connections, then let me know. So looking forward to my grad school career here at Csun, I wanted to look into DRES. That being said, I emailed them, I called them, and I was never able to reach anybody. And so there was a lack of access, and due to, executive dysfunction that I have, due to multiple episodes for multiple disabilities that I have, I was not able to pursue trying to get hold of them again. Which leads me to how I am as a student. I usually make connections with my professors one-on-one to find accommodations for me, and without the use of dress. I also believe there's a lack of services that dress does not offer that would benefit me greatly. And those are my reasons that I'm not with dress. Thank you.
Thanks, Finley. Hopefully I'll have time to circle back to you again. So the next person that I would like to introduce is Connor. And Connor, would you like to take a minute, because I'm learning from Finley, would you like to take a minute to introduce yourself? I asked Connor to join us today because not only is he been a student, but he's also a staff member on our campus. So take it away, Connor.
Yes, thank you so much, Beth, and thank you so much to everyone, presenters and everybody. My name is Connor Bloom, and this is my last year at Csun. I am not only a student, but also a student assistant at the same college, which deals with making sure that that online classes and videos are ADA compatibility, as well as making sure that all the resources are accessible. I was formally diagnosed as the autism spectrum disorder. It used to be called Asperger's when I was diagnosed, but because of changes with certain systems is autism spectrum disorder. I've had my fair share of challenges with that, more particularly when it comes with learning. Usually tend to be a slower learner than most people. So usually finishing a task or assignment for me would be a little bit harder because I always like to ask a lot of questions, whether it's distraction, and so it was. It still is a challenge for me, and hopefully this conversation will help spark a positive movement to bring not only just for us as students, but also faculty to help students with disabilities and us as with slower learners to make sure that we have the success that we have for graduating and long learning.
Thanks, Connor. So the next person I'd like to introduce is Josh Einhorn. Josh, if you would be so kind as to introduce yourself and then also to address whether or not, how comfortable you feel on our campus disclosing who you are. Thank you.
Who I am. Okay. I'm Josh Einhorn. I'm the grants officer, College of Education, and also I'm a part-time faculty person. I teach in educational leadership in the doctoral program. Beth Lasky and Ellen Stoll reached out to me to be a panelist, and I immediately said yes because I hold those two in the highest esteem. My issue in terms of disability, hidden disability, is I suffer from depression. It's been a lifelong issue. I always benefited when people shared openly about it. So I was named after Josh Logan, a director, and I read his book and he talked about his issue with depression. And I read a lot of biographies. So like George Stephanopoulos, he wrote about his depression. And so that's why I thought, you know what, I'll talk about mine because it helps other people, even one person. I am highly functioning. I will say that social isolation for a depressed person is awful. So when Csun said, you can come back July 6th, I was here July 6th, and I've been here every day since because it's a lot better here than in my bedroom. And but what I wanted to focus on today was coping skills. I practice yoga, meditation. I bike for hours every day. The fresh air, the sunshine is great. When I lived in Brooklyn, I used to ride my bike down to Coney Island. Even in the winter, I'm not kidding, I'd ride my bike, jump in the ocean with snow on the ground and ride my bike home. That cures depression. I will tell you that. In terms of Csun, could not be a more supportive environment. I've had the most wonderful supervisors, Dean Say, Dean Spagna, Dean Tarver Baring, and they were all very well aware without me even self-disclosing. You just can sort of be observant. And since I'm very productive regardless of how I'm feeling internally, it doesn't really affect my work per se. But if people can see, you know, I said sensitive people, like Dean Spagna is a really good example. I'll just share very briefly. I was having a lot of issues with my son who was having his own issues. And I was walking down the hallway with my head tilted down. And Dean Spagna, who was very supportive, said, "Head up, things are going great, things are better." And you know what? He's right. When I lifted my head and looked forward, things were better. So thank you. That's my share.
Thanks, Josh. The next person that I'd like to introduce for our panel is our own Professor Ellen Stoll. What do I say about Ellen? But Ellen, the question that I wanted to address for you today, because you and I have talked about this so many times, is what barriers do you that you've shared with me constantly? I mean, I know what your one wish is, but what is your barrier? What barriers have you experienced on our campus that you've made people aware of, but nothing seems to change?
Well, there are a few, and I have been on campus both as a student and as a faculty for 20 years now. And it took me forever to disclose or ask for accommodations, I am in the most supportive college on campus. I'm in College of Education. Incredible, as Josh pointed out. We've had incredible deans, Dr. Tarver Baring, everybody. But I was afraid to ask for accommodations, afraid that as an adjunct professor, I would not get the classes I needed. I would not get what I needed for the longest time. And as much as there's embracing on campus, there's not a lot of talk about disability, and mine is visible, so people know. But the President's Picnic every year that I have been on campus is on grass. And as Syreeta pointed out, sometimes it's just tiring. I don't want to have to ask people to go get me the food to join this event. I don't want to have to try to wheel across the grass. And so I just stopped going because I spoke about it to people and said, look, you know, and I'm pretty outgoing, so I will go and ask for my accommodations. But students, I'm like, this is not welcoming. Little things like that are not welcoming. We still have a student recreation center that does not have fully inclusive equipment. So students are already, because as Syreeta pointed out, that disability is not seen in a positive light. So if you have an impairment or live with a disability, you're not always, because you've been taught not to see it as positive, going to be as outgoing. And so when you go into some place that isn't welcoming, that isn't open and doesn't have the accommodations or the equipment or the attitudes for you, then you just end up not going, and you just give up and step back and give in to that tiredness that comes from fighting all the time. And I think numbers of our students give into that, and it ends up affecting their academic careers. I know it has affected my ability to get out there and do the things. I am still fighting for disability to be seen as a cultural identity. When I talk about it in equity and groups, they're like, oh yeah, we have accommodations, we have ramps, we have interpreters. I'm like, that is fabulous, we need all of those. But what we need to have is a disability cultural center. We need to find pride so that people use our services. We not need to be segregated by the medical model with just accommodations of what we need, but to be seen as proud individuals with intersectional identities that are embraced and included. And those are, you know how passionate I am about this. This is just, I really want to see this campus move forward, get a disability studies minor program, and to include a disability cultural center that provides a safe space to share those microaggressions we experience constantly from ableism, from professors, from other members. We are incredibly lucky in the College of Education to have such an incredibly supportive, educated group. It is not true across the campus, and definitely not in the higher administrative systemic systems that are at play.
And that's why I love Ellen. The next person I'd like to introduce is Kathy Macleod. And Kathy is, I'm going to ask you if you would mind introducing yourself. And my question also for you is, as an administrator on our campus, what do you think are some of the issues regarding deaf people on our campus? So we'll start with that.
Well, hello, everyone. And thank you, Beth, for your question. There's a litany of things I could list. And just recently we've experienced some frustrations through Zoom. And clearly, there needs to be improvements that have happened over time. The access over the last hour and a half has been a struggle. Now, as a deaf administrator, deaf students either feel excluded or included, depending on their connections with people, their colleges. There's not a one-size-fits-all issue, of course. Some attitudes of just a few, I don't want to say that there are many, but there are a few faculty members that do not make them feel welcome in their own classrooms. They feel that it's an inconvenience to have interpreters, captionists in their classrooms. And so there has to be an emphasis on, they are your partners. These service providers are allowing for there to be access so that the student can get their education. That's why the service providers are there. So that's just one example. The environment, sometimes captioning is not available. There's fire alarms that aren't necessarily accessible to deaf people to know that there's something happening. At Csun, yes, it's pretty good, but in some areas, it's not fully accessible, alarms and warnings and such. Social engagement is difficult for some deaf students to be able to just get involved in different clubs and organizations. They have to request, I need to get an interpreter. And so there are a lot of hearing staff and faculty who go, oh, that's too expensive. And so they look at us as a dollar sign, right? They just see this as an expense. And it's not. It should be an availability. And yes, it's hard for them to understand many of the resources for people with disabilities. Oftentimes it's just a one-time charge, like, oh, we just build a ramp and there we go, we're done. But interpreters is a constant charge. There's always just this human, it's a personal resource and it's a constant one. So technology, you can set up a one-time accessibility opportunity, but for deaf individuals, we need a live person provided to have that open act classes, access and organizations and presentations. So that I won't take any more time, but that just scratches the surface of some of the issues that occur. So we want to encourage that there is inclusivity, that there's an opportunity for full social experience in a mainstream campus like we have at Csun. That's important to invest in that as much as we can. So thank you.
Kathy, would you mind letting everybody know what you administer, what you're the administrator of?
Oh, sorry. I just jumped forward. My apologies. Yes. I am the director of the Heart and Hearing Services here on campus in our center. We have about 150 deaf students in the university. And I'm an administrator. I was born deaf. My parents had rubella. In the third month of my mother's pregnancy, she experienced rubella. And when people look at me and apologetically say, "Oh, you're deaf. Well, I'm sure you wish you can hear." No. For me, there's no difference, right? I was born deaf. That's who I am. That's how I continue to live my life. So again, that's some things that happen, and it grows old to have that sympathy, but being looked at as just how sorry I am. So I think that as education about deaf advocacy is out there, then people who are deaf and people with disabilities, of course, that all improves and has been improving over the years, but we still have a long way to go. Our work will never be done. It'll never end.
Thank you, Kathy.
You're
So
welcome.
I would like to very quickly circle back to each of our presenters and then end with Rebecca and Syreeta, just so you know where I'm going here. So let's start with Finley. Finley, what can our campus do to send a message of empowerment and inclusion to disabled folks on our campus?
That is such a nuanced and powerful question. I did get the questions ahead of time. I wish I had prepared notes for myself, because now I'm sitting here like, oh my God, the things they could do, like, oh my gosh, they could make my life so much better and easier. Yes. So, I think one of the biggest thing is, as going into the teaching profession, teachers have professional development. I think there needs to be a lot more professional development for professors, that is in regards to disability and working with students with disabilities. Because as a student who's not registered with DRESS, when I come to my professors, disclose my disability, I get a myriad of responses. And some professors are willing and able to make accommodations for me, while others say they will and then they don't follow through. And that's a really big challenging issue, that someone who, is self-diagnosed autistic, someone who, has to disclose every time I have a professor in a class, if there was just more of a culture amongst the professors where they have gone through the education of learning about disabilities. They've gone through, professional developments, where they are taught different ways to accommodate disabled students, and like I said, DRESS doesn't have all the accommodations necessary. They really don't. There's nothing about grading for equity in there. There's nothing about length and time of extensions for assignments. And those are two of the biggest things, because I have a professor right now who marks your grade down if an assignment is late. And when you continuously have episodes that prevent you from getting work done on time, I'm not getting an A in that class. And to no fault of my own, there's no equity for grading in there. And I think that's a huge thing that Csun should adopt as a practice, is equity in grading. And just access to access seems so basic, but it's really just not. Like, I don't understand why I couldn't access DRESS when I needed it.
Thank you. I'm gonna
Thank you. Sorry, I'm so passionate. I could go on forever.
Thank you. I love it. I love it. Thanks. How about Connor? What's that one or two things that our campus can do to send that message of empowerment and inclusion?
So the one big thing that could easily be more is, it combines in the two, but essentially is awareness, especially with the faculty and staff. because many of us, including myself, learn in different ways. It's no longer textbooks, it's different ways. And I know for some of us, it takes a little bit longer times. And also it's harder for us to complete assignments than regular students. And I can know that, for instance, firsthand, especially when studying for exams. Last year, I spoke with the professor, how can I better help? How can I better be prepared for my exam? And the response I got was, just read the book and look at all the past exams and you should be fine. Well, that's great to a certain point. But there's questions like, what do I need to look for? What specific things I should go back to? You know, not just reading a chapter is not going to be good, but like what points I should be going into. But also being able for professors to understand that since we might learn a different way and how they may have to break down certain things for us to understand. And so I truly believe if there's one thing I can say is we need to bring more awareness and more training to everyone so we can, you know, all help each other and to achieve that.
Thanks, Connor. I
Thank
appreciate
you.
it. I can't remember who was next. I think it was Josh.
Hello. So I
Yeah.
quickly jotted down 2 notes. What Csun can do. I really like Ellen's idea about creating a center, and that's a wonderful idea. But the other thing is I really encourage all the people, everyone listening, to take part in some things that already do exist. So I'm going to be concrete. The Institute of Community Health and Wellbeing has wonderful meditation Mondays and well-being Wednesdays, which everyone can benefit from. And it really transcends a lot of, well, firstly, it gives serenity and inner peace, and it really helps with coping skills and everything. So I want to encourage people to do that, which already exists, and it's free.
Great idea. And I will share with everybody that you've provided some of those kinds of services in our own college. So thank you. What about Ellen? Other than making sure that our president's welcoming back isn't on the grass anymore, do you have another suggestion for empowerment?
Well, I think that we really need to bring disability to the forefront of the conversation of diversity. I am on the President's Committee for Equity, Inclusion, and Diversity, and even on that committee, and I love my colleagues on the committee, I am often feeling like I am shouting from the back of the room that we need to include disability in this conversation. Meetings, we have LGBTQIA, we have Chicano studies, we have Black, and not diminishing any of the needs for those intersectionalities, but disability is part of all of them. We have LGBTQIA students with disabilities, Black students with disabilities, Hispanic students with disabilities. The matriculation rate for students in marginalized groups with disabilities is less significantly than other students. We need to track that and support that. I really think bringing it to the forefront in a cultural center, including it in our trainings, so that we're actually talking about it in these faculty trainings, and really educating our professors and instructors on how to accommodate all students, right? If we used accommodating techniques, if we listened to our students who are self-diagnosed and operated with empathy, we would be able to support their success, because that is what we're here to do, as well as the success of faculty and staff. So, you know, bring it into the conversation, put it out there, and create a central hub. That is my wish and my goal.
And I would concur with that. I had very quickly, I had a student who does have a disability tell me that when he asked for an accommodation on an Canvas quiz or test, that the instructor said, no, you'll be cheating. And this idea that an accommodation would imply that somebody is cheating is something that I think our faculty need to think very seriously about. Finally, Kathy, do you have any words of wisdom of how we can send a message of empowerment, inclusion, specifically for our deaf faculty, staff, and students, but also any disabled person on our campus.
One request I would have is for people to not assume things about us or don't tell us where we should sit or give us their opinions. Instead, just ask us. Ask us what our needs are, what our wants are. Like, for example, someone just will decide that, okay, Kathy's going to sit over there in the audience for an event, and no, I'd actually rather sit in a different place so I have a better view of the speaker. Because the speaker is way across the other side of the room and the interpreters are on the other side of the room. So I have to look back and forth between the interpreter and the presenter. So it's that simple as ask what is best for us. So, and what our needs are. Just want to throw that out there. Thank you for asking that question.
Perfect, perfect. So now in the next, I think we have about 7 minutes left. I'd like to invite both Rebecca and Syreeta. So we'll start with Rebecca. If you could maybe give us some perspective on things that you've heard, some of the questions, some of the responses of our panel members, and you can, just your perspective on that, what you've heard.
I think that there is so much tremendous opportunity. Hold on a second. 3-year-old, can you please go sit? You have my phone. Please go over there somewhere. I think that there is such a tremendous opportunity to reshape how we think about disability student services and the ADA for the next generation. I coined the term the ADA generation, which is the first generation of students with disabilities who went to school at the nexus of the ADA and IDEA. And if you would have asked me before what I thought was coming next, I wasn't really sure, but it's clear to me that this is the COVID generation. And this is the group of students that have the legacy of the fact that we have asked for online learning. We have asked for enhanced accommodations for decades and been denied. And now we've seen how it's worked for a number of students, how it also hasn't worked for a number of students as well. But we've seen that the flexibility exists. It's just that people and institutions of higher education haven't wanted to do it. And so having gotten a taste of equity, what does it mean going forward for the next generation of students with disabilities? And I think it is about culture. It is about having spaces that are intrinsically yours on a college campus. It's about having staff and faculty who feel safe disclosing. Because as Marian Wright Edelman says, you can't be what you can't see. And so creating a space where staff and faculty can self-identify. It's also changing how we talk about, it's almost like ADA 2.0. How do we make the ADA hip and sexy? And given that we have 10 million newly disabled people in this country, can we figure out a way to make the accommodations process not awkward, painful, or annoying? Like, how do we ground it in success in addition to compliance? How do we ground it in, these are your civil rights you're accessing when you access these accommodations? Yes, we are required to provide them to you by law, but this is an action that you're taking that is grounded in civil rights that people died for you to have access to today. And so how do we reframe the ADA as part of the civil rights armor that marginalized students access when they set foot on campus? instead of it being stigmatized, as we've heard people say by faculty, as cheating.
Thanks, Rebecca. And Syreeta, a minute or two of closing comments from what you've heard. I've been trying to follow you on all the everybody on all the chat, but
Yeah, the chat has been really phenomenal. And I think about what's happening on your campus and how it's really a reflection more broadly of our society and the way that disability is seen as an afterthought, as just ramps and accessibility, and really being able to open up the mainstream of DRES and the deaf community and be able to have it front, center, and proudly there. Because the resources that are sidelined also sends a message to disabled students that they too can be sidelined and will be sidelined. And the way professors speak to us sideline us as well. And a point that I loved in the chat as well from, let me see, where was this? From Kristen, that making inclusive teaching practices that like accessibility optional, those disabled people, whatever, they'll deal with it later. Like, it should be required just as much as any other part of a teacher's training to make sure that disabled students are seen and included and respected at all times. And JADE is really working towards getting disability serving institutions to be just as real as Hispanic serving institutions, historically Black institutions, because intersectionality impacts Black and Hispanic communities at a higher rate, and it matters. And I don't know why these communities don't also publicly talk about DRES and deaf communities when they too could benefit from realizing these services are ours. We have these additional resources. We can be just as proud of these resources as we are to be Black, Indigenous, or disabled, or deaf. It's not about deaf gain, about losing something and being disabled. We've all gained something. My disabilities have taught me a lot, and I hope that I've left you with a lot to learn as well. So thank you for having me.
thank you, both of you. And so I'm going to now turn it over to Julia for a couple closing remarks. And I just want to thank everybody. Ellen's computer crashed, so she's not here now. She just texted me. So, but I'll let her know that I'll thank her on my behalf. Go ahead, Ellen. I mean, Julia.
I just want to say a few closing words. First, I want to thank our speakers, Rebecca and Syreeta, and our panelists, Connor, Finley, Joshua, and Kathy, and our fantastic interpreters, Kevin and Andrew. And also a special thanks to Ellen and Beth for planning this important town hall. Most importantly, I want to thank all of you for attending today. We really hope that this has been an informative and interesting town hall. We encourage all of you to join us for our upcoming events sponsored by the Csun Act Now campus team. And I want to put in a little plug for all of our team members. If you are interested in joining us, you're welcome. So just go to our webpage and fill out a form and you can become a team member. We welcome all students, staff, faculty, and community members who want to participate in our campus efforts to increase civic engagement and our democratic participation. Thanks, everybody. We look forward to seeing you at more of our events in spring 2022. Have a great rest of your semester.
I just wanted to thank everybody so much. Syreeta, Rebecca, it's such an honor. I got to hear the whole end. I just couldn't do anything because it just freezes. I just can't access anything or do anything, but thank you all so much. Greatly appreciated. So Connor, Finley, everyone. Syreeta, we will keep in touch, and Julia and Beth, of course, and Pamela, thank you for your support, and Bonnie for getting everything together.
Yeah, this has been just such a phenomenal experience.
Good. Thanks, Syreeta. I'm glad I found you on Facebook.
That's why I really want to try to find a public speaking firm to represent me, so I don't have people find me. I've had people try to find me on LinkedIn. I'm like, I'm not here.
Oh, you know,
I'm there. I'm on there. I have an account on LinkedIn, but like Twitter also, like, I guess I should have said this earlier. Twitter is like one of these untold gems of being disabled in higher ed, where we have this amazing community. We laugh, talk, open, honest, transparent, and like learning from other disabled academics like every day about the experiences they have. And I don't think I'd be in the place I was if I hadn't taken a step to join Twitter, which has been so much more beneficial than that LinkedIn that feels like a stoic kind of stuck kind of thing.
Syreeta, we have a couple of faculty members, actually former faculty members, who do have speaking companies. So yeah, maybe we could put you in touch with them. So
Yes, please.
okay, one is a former journalism faculty, and then we have a former faculty in communication studies, and they actually moved on. But I'll send you their names.
I'd love that, and if you could send me introductions,
Absolutely, I'd be happy to.
Because that'd be really helpful to not always be like, what are my rates? How am I? And doing all the logistics of booking myself and then preparing for events and being at events and then the invoicing of events. I'm like, oh, it's a lot. I think I'm at like 2 or 3 events behind on invoices. I have ADHD problems with invoices. That's why I also think about doing a disability consulting nonprofit, because Players Philanthropy Foundation, they have like accounting support. And I'm like, aha, this could be nice to get them to invoice for me.
That's right. You know, we would have, you know, in community engagement, we could have a student scholar help you.
Yeah, there you go.
Yeah,
I'm down with that.
okay.
Judith, thank you so much for inviting me.
Connor.
So nice
Thank
meeting you, Connor.
for sharing.
Nice meeting you,
with
Serena.
us.
I'm sorry, what was that,
Thanks,
Judith?
everybody. I said thank you so much for sharing your story with all of us.
Of course, and I hope I get involved more here at Csun.
Definitely,
Great.
Connor. I'll be reaching out, and Syreeta, I will continue to stay in contact. And again, thank you, ACT Now, for helping us put this on and bringing this to the attention. You know how passionate he is. I'm going to go help my daughter with her paper because I just see I have a Google Doc.
And ACT Now should be on Twitter.
Actually,
are you on Twitter,
Pamela? Are we? It's the we do have Twitter, and what's the other one we have?
I had trouble finding you on Twitter.
I'd have to double check, but we might be able to exit from that from the link that I posted on the chat from the CAN page. I thought there were
there's a CAN page. Oh, okay.
Yeah, we have a Csun Act Now page, but I think we met. I'm not sure if we're on Twitter. I know we're on Instagram.
Yeah, the disability community is a bit more robust on Twitter, because it intersects with med Twitter, psych Twitter, public health Twitter. It intersects with the White House Twitters and things like that. It intersects more broadly. So I think it's more powerful to be on Twitter. First, personal thoughts.
We'll try that. This is like already beyond my limit of, you know, like stuff.
Find a student who really enjoys Twitter or wants to really learn more, and yeah, you could connect them with me, and I could share resources or whatever. So yeah,
I barely use Twitter, so.
Like, find disabled in higher ed. Like, we are such an amazing community. Like, like being the CEO of disabled in higher ed feels weird as a title, but I guess.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's really phenomenal. I love it so much.
I'll definitely take a look at that, because I don't really go on Twitter, and I just try to be spending more time with my family and focusing more on The last year. That
Oh,
was so
I
fortunate. So.
I get you completely. Like, I'll give one of my examples of how Twitter has been life-saving for me, because I follow the ADHD academic and they share so many amazing tips. Like, when I was first diagnosed with ADHD, I'm like, help, I was diagnosed with ADHD and I don't know how to fix it. How to do education, right? And the helpful advice has been phenomenal. And I created an accountability thread called Mice, Pain, and ADHD versus Thesis. And I'd update people as I was going along with my thesis, where I was struggling. They'd give encouragement and support. And I had an accountability buddy that also works with Black and Immuno. And I think if it was not for being on disability Twitter, I would not have finished my thesis as completely. So it's really valuable for education too.
And congratulations for doing that. I'm sorry I've got to run to my class, but
that is totally okay.
So much.
My pleasure. I should probably run and check in on Mom because she just got off work 7 minutes ago and I realized I haven't called her yet.
Right. Thanks, everybody. See you again soon.
Thank you. And if you end up on Twitter, Connor, I'm always a S Nolan _ Syreeta away.
I will definitely. I'll hope to get to connect with you soon.
Please, sounds good. And yeah, do I email you slides so it can be included with the recording?
Yeah. Email me.
Okay. Is that the same email that sent me the
Yes, it's the same email.
No, that sent no reply.
Oh, well, it's just Julia. Here, let me put in the chat. Julia.Ryan at csun.edu.
Okay. Dandy.
Great.
Let me copy that and I will paste it into my email and send you slides.
Okay, thank you.
I just finished my slides like half an hour before this.
Actually, yeah, I'll send you an email now so you can just reply to it.
That sounds perfect because I cannot copy.
Yeah, no problem. So what's your email again?
It is snolan.jade@gmail.com.
At gmail.com. Okay, and then I'm going to put Bonnie in here, and I'm going to put Pamela, and I'm going to put community engagement. And then it comes to all of us, and I'm just going to say slides, and that will be your reminder.
And is there any way you could share them out to your Black, Indigenous, LGBT, and women's community on your campus?
Sure. Yep.
Because I think the way to get disability more included on campus is to intersect it more. So it doesn't silo away.
We'll also put it on our website.
Cool. Okay, and I also have my journal article as well linked at the end. So if you haven't read it yet, I'm so excited and proud of it that I have a solo authored publication already.
Okay, we'll put you in our newsletter too, the next one we sent out. Sweet. All right, so send those and we'll also send them out to all the registrants because we had several people ask for them.
Okay, sounds phenomenal. And I'm always open for booking and support with an agent. So welcome. Thank you so much for offering. I appreciate you.
Okay, bye-bye.
Bye.